Now when it comes to gluing up a mitered piece like this, whether it's a box or this lantern, one of the real tricky parts is what to do about those miter joints, because you can't really use ordinary clamps. Once the glue goes on, things start sliding around all over the place. Now in the plans, we talked about cutting slots in each of the mitered faces to hold splines, and that aligns everything. But I'm going to show you a way that you don't need to use the splines because the long grain joints are plenty strong all on their own. My solution here is to use masking tape. And here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to start by aligning two pieces that fit together, and I'm using the bottom edge as my reference. Then I'll take a couple of strips of masking tape, apply it on one side of the joint, rub it in, and then pull the piece and the tape to stretch the tape ever so slightly. Then rub that down, and I'll do the same thing along the bottom. One in the middle. And then I like to apply one strip all along the outside of the joint. What this does is then will force any excess glue to go to the inside where it's not going to be as noticeable. Now you can very carefully flip this whole thing over, and we can start to apply glue on the joint faces. Now, even though I'm kind of constraining where the glue is going to go, I still don't want to apply a ton of it because it just doesn't need to be oozing out all over the place. Okay, now there's one more critical step here that you don't want to forget, and that's to put the bottom in place, because once you fold everything up, it's going to be much harder to add it later on. So I'm going to slip that into one of the grooves, and now all I need to do is wrap the remaining sides around that bottom. And the tape is going to act like a hinge and clamps all at the same time to hold everything in place. So now I'll take strips of tape just like I did before on this final side. There we go. Now here comes the hardest part. That's just waiting for the glue to dry. Now, no matter how hard I try to keep parts aligned when gluing up a mitered assembly like this, inevitably you're going to get some unevenness on the top and bottom edge. Now it's really not a big deal. I've attached a couple of strips of adhesive back sandpaper to the top of the bench. Then I can just sand it until it's sitting level. I have a little bit more work here left to do, but once that's flat and then I have the top flat, we can go back and turn our attention to the top. Now what I've done here after the glue up is to sand everything nice and smooth, and then I've laid out the position of a chamfer that I want to cut on the bottom edge of the top assembly. Now, I could do this back at the router table with that chamfer bit, but I thought it would be a great opportunity now to do some hand tools. And when you're working with redwood, it planes so easily, you kind of feel like a superhero. And just lock it in the vise, and then I can Now you're just planing and holding the hand plane at an angle, working your way down to those layout lines. Once they just disappear, you can rotate it and move on to the next edge. All right, when it's time to attach the top to the lantern body, there's a few things that you want to do. The first of those is to make sure that the top is going to be centered on the body. So what I've done is positioned it upside down, because then I can see on the inside a little easier. And I've made some reference marks on the underside of the top. Those reference marks will almost never be seen once the project is finished. But what I can do with that is, once it's aligned, like I said, I'll make those marks. Then I'll flip it back over. I'm going to apply just a really thin bead of glue, because I really don't want to have to deal with a bunch of squeeze out here. Then I'll quickly set it in place before my glue drips. Okay. Now to reinforce the joint, I'm going to drive in some 1-inch pins right in the center, and I've marked a couple of those locations there. Okay, the nice part about the pins is that they leave a pretty small indentation, which I can sand over and fill once it's done. So the lantern body is itself done, and we're going to set it aside, turn our attention to making the brass handle.